Hi, I'm Amy McCaw. Thank you for tuning in. Today I'm joined by Andreina Cordani, who is the author of a fantastic YA thriller called The Girl Who, which you can just see behind me. And I was really lucky to read a proof of this towards the end of last year. And it's one of those books that even though I read it probably nearly half a year ago now, I'm still thinking about it because it's got really clever plotting, fantastic characters. So today we're going to be talking a lot about how Andreina approached writing it and hopefully steal some tips. So welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Hi,
It's,
nice to be here.
it's only my second interview, so hopefully everything will go smoothly like it did with Kat. Would you be able to start by telling us a little bit about the book for people who might not have read it yet?
Yeah, absolutely. It's called The Girl Who, and it is about Leah, who, when she was young, when she was 7 years old, she saw her mother and sister killed in front of her. A really, really horrific event that's kind of defined her life. And as a result, her father, to try and make sense of what happened, sets up a charity in trying to campaign against crime in urban environments, lots of social projects, that kind of thing. And she becomes like a poster girl for forgiveness. She becomes part of the campaign. She is the media love her, and she is very, very, very involved in the charity. But she's also, she's now 17, so she's come. She wants to grow up, and people are still sending her teddy bears because she was in a famous photo with a teddy bear. People are still expecting her to wear her hair the same way and to be the nice, good little sedate, forgiving girl. And she has a lot of anger about what happened, and she doesn't know what to do with it. And she's thinking an awful lot about revenge. And just around the same time that the attacker is released from jail, her dad gets together with Claire, and Claire's daughter and son, Ellie and Dylan, move in with Leah and her dad, and they have to make a step family, which is kind of awkward. So Leah's being pulled in two different directions. In one way, there's this relatively normal family, and then the other way, there's just the dark feelings that she's fighting against.
Oh, that's such a fantastic blurb. And I think when you're saying that, it's bringing back all the memories of the things I loved about reading it. And what I was really interested in was the fact that it's the two narrators, so the two stepsisters. When you went into writing the book, did you feel as you started that it was going to be a character-driven plot, or did you find that it was the plot that drove you through the writing of it?
Oh, plots always come last for me. I think of situations first. So with this one, I just thought, how would you, if you were in this situation, how the hell would you grow up? And if people have all these expectations of you, how do you kind of discover who you are and figure out what you want to do with your life when everyone is looking at you like you're some kind of either a fragile thing or a saint? So that kind of that the situation always comes to me first, and then after that I thought about the step situation, and about introducing a stepsister. And the thing about Ellie, the stepsister, is that she wants to be famous. She's just always wanted to be famous, not really sure about how. I mean, it becomes about YouTube a lot, but she's not fussy about how. She just really wants to be well known, wants to be a performer. And obviously Leah is famous for all the wrong reasons. So you have this kind of, the two girls are very different from each other, and not massively fond of each other, but suddenly they have to live under the same roof.
Yeah, and I think what I really liked about the way you did that is that there were very distinct narrators as well. So I ended up reading it quite late at night because I'd got a really young baby at the time. And I found that I could pick up the book asleep or half asleep, not totally asleep, obviously. That would be really clever, wouldn't it?
That would be genius.
And I would know straight away which character it was. So I could be halfway through a chapter one that I'd almost fell asleep reading the night before, but kind of kept awake because I was so engrossed. How did you manage to do that? And did you find it difficult to shift between the two narrators?
It's funny because Ellie's voice came first. And it took me a while to I worked on it for quite a while before I thought, hang on, this is ridiculous. I need to know what Leah's thinking, because she's the character everyone's interested in. But as soon as I started to write Leah, this kind of, slightly cynical, smart alecky kind of tone came in. And I don't know, I mean, I think Leah and Ellie are both different aspects of me in a way, because like Ellie is quite performative and likes, you know, make it, and she's very creative and she likes to show off the things that she's created, and I'm kind of a bit like that. But then I also have the Leah side, where I also quite happily live behind a bookshelf and not speak to anyone for days. So yes, I think they were both kind of quite easy to get, because I got both of them.
That's great. And it's interesting, the things that you tapped into, so like their interests and the way they see the world and everything, I think that kept them really separate in my mind, which was helpful, because I think with a thriller sometimes there's so much going on, and especially in this, when Leah's past plays into it and the present for Ellie and Leah, and somehow as a reader I could completely get that straight. So obviously a lot of that was to do with the way you'd written it. It was great. And the other thing I thought, I'm just consulting my questions because I know we've got something about plot next. So I wanted to know, because obviously your plot is complex and it relates to the past of characters and slowly finding out exactly what happened to Leah. How much of that did you know going into it? So when you wrote the first draft, did you know exactly where it would end and what the different angles would be? So I'm trying to word it carefully and not spoil anything.
Yeah. No, I'm sort of. It's funny because I don't think of it as particularly twisty, because not because I always knew what was going to happen, because I didn't. I went into it just, as I said, with this situation in my head, and just noodled for ages, not really knowing where it was going, and I wasn't sure if it was going to become like an emotional, you know, family drama-y kind of a book, or coming of age. And then I think I got more and more influenced by thrillers. I was reading a lot of thrillers at the time, and just really like the little tricks that people do and the storytelling methods that people use. And I sort of got more and more into that. And I don't do drafts in the same way, in the way that other people seem to do. Instead of doing, like, you know, rattling out a first draft really quickly and then finessing it, I can't seem to do that. So what I do is I write, and then I go back and change it, and then I go back and change it, and then by the time I've got the first draft, I mean, well, for this one anyway, because I had years to do it, it was in reasonably good shape, and it only needed editing rather than completely redrafting. So by the time I got to the end, I did know what would happen, but there were some chapters where I kind of knew roughly what needed to happen, and then suddenly the characters took over, and I never really used to understand it when writers said that. But, you know, there's a chapter where they're at a party, and it's all and like the two of them get separated at a party, and at the beginning of the party chapter I didn't really know that they were going to get separated, or why. I just kind of knew that Leah had to be on her own by the end of the chapter, and then suddenly, like, Ellie just took over and went crazy with glitter. So I hope that hasn't spoiled anything too much, but yeah.
No, I think that was good. That was just the right amount of information, I think. No, I think that's really clever, though. That's the way you have got to know your characters so well, that knowing the little things that Ellie does, like the fact that she loves glitter and sparkle, and that's part of the things that she does, isn't it, as part of her YouTube channel. I think that obviously just propelled your plot forward, and that's how character can kind of feed plot. I was just grinning as you said that not many people write a first draft like that, because I'm exactly the same as you. I literally write a chapter and cannot go on to the next chapter until I've read what I've just written. And that's fine if you've only written one chapter, but when you've written 50,000 words, it's a bit of a problem. Yeah. And I find sometimes I complicate myself by just editing the chapter before and knowing that I've already quite closely edited. So I do get to the end and find that I've written myself in some corners, or there were big plot holes in my first draft, but it was a cohesive whole. Whereas I've got a friend called Maria Kuznia who writes middle grade and fantastic adult books that are coming out later this year, and I hope she won't mind me revealing some of her tricks, but she writes and then bullet points parts that she is thinking about still, and then comes back to them, allowing her to write a faster first draft. So I'm thinking of trying that, because I'm trying to write something to quite a tight deadline at the moment, and I'm thinking that if I do get to that point, I might try the bullet pointing approach, but I've never done it before, so it will be interesting. Have you ever tried different ways of writing, or do you find that just is the way that works for you?
Well, I had to try, because last year I had, because my next book is coming out in January next year.
Exciting.
But it meant I had to write a first draft in lockdown last year, when I was also doing homeschooling, and when we were all just in such a weird mental state anyway, couldn't focus on anything for more than 5 minutes. So I really tried doing that. I did a synopsis to the 2-book deal. I tried to stick to that. And I did NaNoWriMo in November, just rattle out as much as I could, got to 30,000 words and hit a screaming great plot hole. And then it took me ages to get myself out of it. And actually, it didn't really take that much writing to get myself out of the literal plot hole, but it was like the mental state of, oh God, this isn't working. And I just stalled. And yeah, it took me a while to fix that. And I'm still picking up the plot holes even now.
So it might be a good time to talk about that, actually. So I've been a debut the same as you in the year that we never ever would have predicted when we got our book deals. Yeah. So obviously book 2 is seen as quite a difficult thing for an author to do anyway. Why do you think that is, that when you hear people talk about their debut, it seemed to be fine and it was their passion project and loved it, and then book 2 they either hate writing it or it's really hard or they kind of question everything? Like, what is that about book 2, do you think, especially during a pandemic?
It's funny because you think when you're writing book 1, I don't know if you have this same feeling, you think, if only I had a deal, then I would know that this was okay, that I could write, because I'd have the confidence because I know someone else has got faith in me. And then you get the deal, and then you've got that, so you feel a bit more secure, and then you start thinking, but what if this is terrible, and then they've put all this faith in me and I've just messed it up. Book 2 for me is a different kind of beastie as well, because book 1 is really character based. So everything's character based, but this is really, it's literally, I threw these 2 girls together and saw what they did, and then sort of Boyd, the third narrator, kind of came in later at the end, because I felt we needed to know more about him. But I can't remember what I was saying now.
Book 2.
This idea was more like, a very public murder happens. Everyone knows it's murder. Now what? And like, my characters are thrown into this situation rather than it being this sort of slow burn of characters sort of, kind of picking off against each other or whatever. It's got, red herrings and twists, and it's much more thrillery. And I just kept sort of waking up and going, oh, what about his phone? They'd be able to track his phone and all this sort of stuff. And I was like, oh God, right, okay, what's happened to his phone? And like, I just had to keep fighting these fires as I went along.
Set a book in 1995. That's what I recommend.
Yeah.
There were many times where I thought, oh gosh, if there were mobile phones or internet, my whole plot would not work.
I know. I do remember, because talking to you has probably brought this into my mind. There was a few episodes of Angel where they started getting trapped in abandoned warehouses with bunches of monsters or whatever. And all of a sudden, Cordelia would go, no, signal! Yeah. And that's what you have to do. So, or something has to happen to the mobile phone. Like, even in The Girl Who, that something unfortunate has to happen to a mobile phone at one point to make the plot work.
Yeah, I had a similar conversation with Goldie Moldovsky, who wrote a brilliant thriller called The Last Girl that came out in April as well. And again, she had a moment where a mobile phone would have saved the day and something had to happen to the phone. I won't spoil exactly what, but you can look out for that moment if you read it. It's interesting, isn't it? Because the 90s was a deliberate choice for me, because it fit the fact that the Interview with the Vampire movie had come out, and at the time the crime rate in New Orleans was really high, but it did help me, I think, a little bit in terms of writing a thriller. Do you think that it's harder to write a thrilling story in modern times, or other things that I have missed out on because I was writing set in the 90s?
Well, it's funny because I'm finding that what I end up writing about is getting my head around the stuff that young people have to cope with nowadays.
Yeah.
So this second book is all about, well, they're not called YouTubers for legal reasons, but it's about YouTubers. And just the idea about you know, people being that famous and that successful, but being like 18, and it's different to being famous for like having a hit record or something. It's basically, it's being famous for being who you are. And so it means that you can't change, or if you do change, people will judge you. People feel like they own you. People watch every tiny little thing that you do, and you're expected to be a role model. You're given millions of pounds, and then you're expected to be some upstanding role model when you're 16, when you're just still figuring out who you are. So the characters in my next book kind of are in that situation and all deal with it in very different ways. But so, yeah, I mean, it's made things like being trapped in an abandoned warehouse a bit more escapable. And it's made crime a bit more difficult to conceal. But at the same time, it's made the emotional situations so much more charged, and it's, there's so much pressure on people these days, especially young people, because it's just, I don't know. I mean, I worry enough about what to put on my Instagram, and I've got 3 followers.
I know that feeling, definitely. And it's interesting, isn't it? I watch loads of booktube videos, and I sometimes look at the rooms that they're sitting in and think, is that a perfect whole house, or is that just one corner? I mean, before this, honestly, the shelf, which you can see just there, I'd got my camera in a different angle, and I realized that was full of the most horrendous clutter that was probably going to fall and engulf me during the interview. But I do wonder, are people's whole houses like that, or do they have an Instagram and YouTube corner that is immaculate? So yeah, that book sounds amazing to me. I'm really fascinated in that, and the fact that we've come at it, not to age us, but we've come at it a little bit later than growing up in our teens. I think I got a mobile phone in my mid to late teens.
I tell you when I got a mobile.
So I won't ask you to, don't worry. And it played Snake, and that was really high tech, that you could play Snake on your phone. So it is really fascinating how the impact that has, especially on such a wide scale. And I suppose your second book couldn't have even existed in the 90s. I don't know what they would have been famous for, but it wouldn't have been YouTube, would it?
Well, that was the thing, with Ellie, for ages. I came up with Ellie back in I started writing about Ellie down in sort of 2010 or something, and I kept agonizing about this. She wants to be famous, but I didn't want her auditioning to be on Big Brother, because I didn't see her as that type, wanting to be that type of famous. But I also knew she wasn't going to be a talented guitarist or anything, because that's also not part of her character. And then I was at the seaside with a friend. This is a few years ago, and there was this guy on the beach, really kind of looked like a proper traveller type. He was very tanned, very tall, and very relaxed looking, and in his 20s. And these kids kept coming up to him and talking to him, and he was talking to them, and then they'd go away, and then and their parents were all hovering in the background, looking awkward, and then I overheard him explaining to somebody's grandparents, oh, you're probably wondering why your kids, I'm not some weirdo, honest. I'm this guy, I do this this YouTube channel that everybody loves. And I thought, oh God, yeah, of course, YouTube. And up until then, I didn't really have an outlet for Ellie to sort of express this. I toyed with her writing a blog, but again, she's not really a blog writing person, so yeah, I think it sort of fitted. She was the right girl for the right time.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so you say that you had the idea in 2010, or you were trying to work it out then?
Yeah, it was swimming around in my brain. I started writing bits and pieces of it, but it wasn't until kind of years later that I sort of was taking this particular plot more seriously. I had the bad first novel that's never going to see the light of day. I was still working on at the time then.
So what, in terms of, you had the idea, when did you start writing this in earnest, and what was the journey like from that point then?
Good question.
You don't have to tell me exact years or anything, but just I'm just fascinated in that rough process.
Yeah, because it the problem was that so in 2013 I moved down to the south coast. I moved away from London. I gave up my job on Women's Magazine, and went freelance as a journalist and moved down to the South Coast. And the idea was I was going to go freelance, possibly get a dog, and swim in the sea and write my novel. And unfortunately, what happened? Well, not unfortunately, but what happened is I got pregnant. Instead of a dog, I had a baby, who was actually on and off ill a little bit when he was younger. And so I had 3 years where I was just a little bit not quite connected to reality. And then what freelance work I had just completely took over. And then, you know what it's like when you've got a young baby. Like I was madly working on the freelancing or madly being a parent, and there was nothing in between. And every now and again, I'd squeeze out a few hundred words. So it wasn't until a few years ago when I just got to the point where I was like, I can't juggle this anymore. I've got to make a decision. Either I do it or I just walk away from it. And luckily, I have a very supportive partner who was able to say, look, just for goodness sake, just get going on this, just keep working on this, and you know, that here I am eventually.
So did you go the traditional like slush pile kind of getting an agent and that sort of thing first, and then your agent put you on submission to publishers?
I did, yeah. So I did a editing course with Curtis Brown online editing course, because once I did the draft, I had no idea how to edit it. I kept going in, adding things in, then realizing, because I was doing it so slowly, realizing that I'd actually put that in 2 paragraphs before, then having to take it out again. So I did that. I did a bit of an edit, but I wouldn't say I did an exhaustive edit, and then started pitching out. And I think what I made sure was my first 30,000 words or my first 3 chapters or whatever were kind of really tight and really suspenseful, because I realized by then that's what I wanted it to be. And then I pitched it to various agents, obviously tons and tons of rejection letters, etc. Then I noticed that Lena Langley, who's my agent now, she had a thing on her Twitter. We were following each other from we both had previous jobs. I was a books editor, and she was a book publicist. So we were both following each other on Twitter for that reason. And then I saw on her Twitter feed that she was looking for YA especially, and that she was she just moved to be an agent, so she had an open list. And I think finding someone who is, you know, is really keen to sort of make a mark on chat and is going to champion your book, and that's really important, to find someone who's like, you know, hungry to find new clients. And then also she likes the same sort of things that I do. She likes things that are a bit unnerving and a bit creepy and a bit kind of just slightly different or off kilter. And so she got really excited about reading it, and then I got really excited about her reading it. But she works remotely as well, so she's up in Scotland. So we didn't meet until way after I'd signed.
Oh, amazing. And I think it's nice, isn't it, that moment of passion. I think I had a similar thing with my agent. I pitched to her at Yalk, and then she found me later on in the day and said that she was still thinking about my book and she loved the idea, and could I please send her the first few chapters? And I was like, oh, maybe I need to check that they're in a decent state before I do that. But yes, I will. I haven't finished writing the book, but... And yeah, although I then did the traditional process of querying, when I started getting interest from other agents, I let her know. And I ended up signing with her pretty quickly on that basis that I think when you know, like for both of you, if it's going to be a good relationship, it just seems to click right from the beginning, doesn't it? Yeah. So I've just realized what time it is. We've been talking for ages. I'm really enjoying it, but I'm really conscious that I don't want to take up your whole day. So just a couple more questions, really, because we've been focusing about writing and hopefully gleaning some advice for people about how to write an amazing thriller like yours. But I'm sure people are interested in what has been something that you've really liked about being a debut author, and whether it's a debut author during a pandemic or just in general, what's been like a really good thing about it?
It's really funny because I found the time up to launch I found really difficult, because everyone expects you to be super, super happy and super excited, and I was terrified. that, you know, everyone would hate it, or it wouldn't sell, or that I'll have accidentally made a huge mistake in the middle of the copy, or said something offensive, or, you know, every single scenario was going through my head, because that's unfortunately the sort of person that I am. And so I was really kind of, I knew that I should have been enjoying the moment, but I wasn't enjoying it as much as I should be. And then I had this kind of funny thing, like for years, practically my whole life, I've been thinking about one day I'm going to have a book published, and your mind sort of runs through this regular kind of like little pattern of like, one day I'll have a book published, and then this will happen, and you know, and then one day I was just started on that fantasy, and then thought, oh, it's not a fantasy. It's actually happened. And that was a really lovely moment, actually, that just feeling like, I actually did it. And even whatever happens now, there's nothing can take that away from me, that I did do that. And even if I never get another book published again,
you know, there'll be loads.
Spontaneously a bust, whatever happens, you know, I still had a book out, which is what I always wanted.
Yeah, so that's a lovely feeling, isn't it? And I think a lot of us are like that, because as you're saying that, I'm nodding like vehemently that have at any point I've said something that somebody's going to hate, or I've got something factually wrong that I'm going to get picked up on. And I wonder if, I know a lot of authors seem to be like that from what I've heard and talked to people online, because maybe we're that type of analytical person who gets so into a world and into our own heads that then that can also be used against us as well, can't it?
I think it's second nature to us to look at a situation and go, what could go wrong? Because that's where the stories come from.
Yeah, exactly.
So we just do it with our lives as well.
Sabotage ourselves and sabotage our characters.
Yeah.
So I did give you a bit of prep. I don't know whether you've got any books ready that you'd like to show us or talk about, because we were talking before about books that have inspired you, or that that you admire. Can't even speak. Start again. Books that are there any books that have really inspired you, or authors that you have learned a lot from? Whether you want to show us them or talk to us about them.
Okay, so books that inspired me, it's just everything. This is the problem when people ask me for like my favorite anything, or, you know, anything like that. I just am constantly inspired. So, you know, I've just been reading The Upper World by Femi Fadugba, and just absolutely blown away by that. I could never have written that book in a million years, because it's about physics. But it's really exciting, but it's about physics and gangs, which are two things I know very little about. And so, I mean, that massively inspired me. And then before that, I was reading Blackwater Sister, and I'm really sorry the author's name has completely skipped my mind, but that's about Malaysian myths and legends, and that massively inspired me too. I don't know. I mean, there's quite a few authors that I've been reading for years that have, and that I've sort of came across when I was working for magazines as well. They sometimes wrote for us. There's Rebecca Chance, the Bookbuster author, gave me a beta read and made loads of brilliant suggestions. So she was inspiring, and she's been like, she is a plot hole, kind of laser focus on plot holes, and laser focus on, you know, perfectly plotted characterization. So once I had kind of a tentative thumbs up from her, that I knew that I was doing okay. And she was the one that sent me in the direction of Agatha Christie, who, you know, if you want to read perfectly plotted whodunits, they're not everyone's cup of tea, and some of them are just a little bit dated. Just a tad, yeah. Like, you have to read it and just like cringe at some of the you know, stereotypes, but at the same time, like, just so brilliantly written, and so seemingly effortlessly, obviously not. It's just, you know, and when you can see all the misdirections and everything. So she's great. You know, if you are someone who wants to write thrillers with twists, I think you need to read her, you know, because it's almost textbook.
Oh, that is a great point to end on, actually. All those recommendations. I keep thinking that I need to read more Agatha Christie. I went through a patch in my teens of reading absolutely loads of them, and then again in my 20s, but it's probably 10 years since I've read an Agatha Christie book, so I need to check them out. Do you have a favourite one that I should start with?
Not really, because I've only read a couple, and I just recently ordered 16.
Wow.
That they all came together in this big package from eBay. So I'm sort of slowly working my way through, and also Dorothy L. Sayers as well. I quite like the Peter Wimsey's, they're quite fun. But yeah, I mean, I suppose Murder on the Orient Express would be the classic, wouldn't it? But I can't read that now because I've seen the story too many times.
Yeah, I know. I was just thinking, I think I read that probably 20 years ago, maybe. So it might be time for a reread and see if it still holds up to what I remember, because I haven't properly watched any film versions of it, actually. So maybe that's still intact in my mind.
Yeah, no, that will help.
Oh, thank you so much. I've just gleaned so much from that conversation. I'm going to definitely go back through and make notes on how you did that, because I think the fact that you can keep such tight plotting and then such fascinating characters is brilliant. So if that's something that you're looking for, one of the people watching this, I would definitely recommend The Girl Who. Do you have a title for your next book, or anything you can tell us beyond what you've already said?
Well, it's funny because we do have a title for it, but I don't actually know if I'm supposed to talk about it yet.
Maybe not then.
Okay. I just don't know.
So there's a secret title for an exciting book about YouTubers. That's as much of an exclusive as I'm going to get.
Basically, if you search my name on Amazon, the placeholder comes up and you'll find it.
Excellent. Oh, I'll do that straight after.
You can spell it, then you can search it.
Well, I will link all of the books that you've mentioned. I'll link underneath this video, and I will link to your new book. So if anybody wants to see what the title is and get it ordered now, and which I will be doing, then you can do that. Thank you so much. That was great. And I hope you've enjoyed watching, everybody who is watching this video. And if you have, as I mentioned, I've got an interview with Kat Ellis that I did quite recently, and lots of content about books I've read. And I'm hoping that in the coming weeks, there'll be some content about writing. I've got a video about manga coming up, which I'm excited about recording. So lots of things planned. So thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Thank you, Andreina. And I will hopefully see you all soon. Thank you.
Thank you.